And the first question was,
it's basically saying...
Oh yeah, if art should do social service.
Is it a negative that art, is used in this way in terms of the wider context, or is there real possibilities and achievements that art can achieve things maybe that other, areas...
Yeah. I know that there's been a lot of discussion in Britain and before that in the US as well, that from the 90s onwards, social agencies, found out that artists could do social work much cheaper than professional social workers, and that most of the US funding in particular was geared towards just, supporting community mobilizing projects and community engaged projects. And that there was a lot of resistance towards that within the art world. Again, this refusal to be instrumentalized. But if we go back to Zhukovnievsky, I'm not afraid of being instrumentalized as long as I decide what the content is going to be. I'm proud to put my knowledge and my skills, my particular curatorial knowledge and skills into the service of social work, and I think it's a fantasy to expect any state to be able to take care of its citizens. I mean, we're working towards that horizon, but I haven't seen it unfold anywhere, and while we wait for that to happen, we better do something about it as citizens, as co-members.
I think that's an interesting way. Here now we have not social inclusion but the big society. So I think that's an interesting way of sort of separating yourself away from that particular mode. Any other questions? Harry?
Ian talked earlier about the idea of students as being sort of political weather vanes because of the kind of lack of responsibility and investment in society that students have, and not having mortgages. Does art kind of exist in a similar situation because it is a movable area of culture? It's not as so defined. It's not got so defined a position within culture as other areas. Does it kind of exist as a weather vane as well? Then?
Does it kind of exist as...
Does it exist as a weather vane? What Ian was talking earlier about, pointing towards the future, or the political future.
Again, being the transnational feminist, or trying to be a transnational feminist, I would say that that it's not students in particular that we should look at if we want to find ways to combat capitalist globalization, which is what we're really talking about here, right? What system has produced these inequalities? What system has produced exploitation, and what system has produced, and it's a question of whether it's a system or an ideology. I think it's a system. I think if you really want to understand the operations of corporate capitalist globalization, you have to look at women. They bear the brunt of globalization, whether it be in the global south or the global north. There's plenty of marginalized groups within the global north. It's not a clear-cut divide between people who have not in the south and people who have in the north. We're all entangled now, and Vandana Shiva has really made this very clear that if we want to understand these operations, we have to read up the ladder of power. So we have to look at how women on a daily basis are coping in the sweatshops, in the Nike sweatshops, in the outsourced US corporations in Indonesia and so forth. And we have to see how they come up with alternatives. This is also where I think you can look for models of sustainability. I think students, despite being super privileged in our part of the world, of course also has a lot of intellectual baggage to put into that, and I think the question is really how to unite struggles transnationally. One of the problems I've had with Western feminism is that it is, for at least the first and second generation, it operated with very stable categories of gender and sexuality and applied feminism only to white, straight women. And unless you're able to organize on a feminist line and then connect that struggle with similar struggles outside of your own nation state, then we'll never get to the point of co-responsibility and mutual accountability and be able to form these bonds of deep solidarity that these transnational feminists are suggesting. So if we want to put the trampoline house on the political agenda and have a real political say, we have to be outspokenly political. We have to become a space that the media will contact whenever there's a tightening of the system. We have to become that place that people refer to in order to test the limits of the system or the condition of the system. And if we do that, we can't get the asylum seekers to visit because they're anti-state. So this is a complex that we're trying to negotiate right now, and I'm sure that there's an answer to it. Otherwise, we will fail completely. But in the long run, we want to do the hard work of changing discourses surrounding asylum seekers and refugees, and politically motivate people to vote differently. And that demands entering into the real space of reality, life.
This, I think we're quite familiar with the idea of activist art, but I think the idea of activist curating is much more recent. And I think I've always been interested in the sort of inherent contingency of the curatorial position because it's always associated with the institution. You're always sort of straddling these two worlds. And I realise from your project that you're sort of taking very particular aspects of the curatorial role. I think, if I remember correctly, curating means to care, usually to care for objects in a collection. There's a different model of caring here. I think the modern, the contemporary mode of curating is about working as part of a network and facilitating projects. And again, I think that's what you're doing here in a sense as well. But I think...
but not even just facilitating.
Mm-hmm.
I think what I'm doing within Kuratorisk Aktion is that we're quite deliberately creating spaces and bringing together people selected very specifically to engage in very specific discussions and creating the premises for that and not necessarily doing it in art institutions, doing it in locations and venues that make sense to the type of engagement that we're looking for. I think the kind of curating that Kuratorisk Aktion does, I mean, our engagement with Nordic colonialism and the repression of it, or the amnesia surrounding it, and how that feeds into extreme right sentiments, xenophobia, racism in the fantastic Scandinavia, is really a 5-year research project. Starting with one project, moving on to a deeper level of that examination, which was triggered by the first, and using curating and the physicalities and the discursive spaces that comes along with that to facilitate that research. It's much more. I think it's much more ambitious. It really wants to produce knowledge rather than facilitating exchange. We want to have a document at the end that equals a PhD, but brought about by images and actions and discussions. Within Gold & Nielsen, we're much more. Let's just do it,
So
there's not so much. There's theory involved in Gold & Nielsen as well, but it's really much more of a test site. Not that Kuratorisk Aktion doesn't test, and run into very problematic and difficult situations when we bring together, post-colonial practitioner from South Africa with a colonized Inuit visual artist in Greenland, and ask them, should Greenland ask for full independence from Denmark? that's also a very difficult situation, but it operates on a different level. I think the work of Kulturinspektion is a little bit more edgy and along the lines of Szymanowski, and the work of Goll and Nielsen is really a little happy, you know, a little let's get together and see if we can negotiate these spaces.
So I can see how this fits in with a sort of, you know, you would like to see this in a network perhaps of other activist models, but is it important for you to see this within a lineage of art history? Is that an important context for you?
Yes, I'm completely informed by the genre of art, activist art that came out of feminism and political organizing in New York in the 60s and in the US in general, but I'm equally informed by political activism and critical research and theory, and trying to fuse it into methodologies that will be capable of, you know, bringing things to the surface and doing something about them.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.